New videos every day.
Hey, John Breeding. It's January 15th, 2009, a couple of weeks into a new year. And I want to do a video, a request, in response to a request. And so the title of it might be, What is mental illness really? Or a title might be, what are some of the dynamics that get called mental illness, right? So I want to talk about that a little bit. It's been in a lot of my other videos, but let's just see if I can focus on that theme. And I've got 6 main approaches to that. First is just to lay out what psychiatry and our mainstream mental health system would say in response to that question. It's very simple. It's the basic assumptions of biological psychiatry, which I've gone over before, that problems in living are due to mental illness, or failures in social adjustment, so-called, are due to mental illness. Simple as that. They're not due to any one of a myriad alternatives. It's due to mental illness. The second assumption, that mental illness is biologically or genetically based. Simple as that. So mental illness is a biological or genetic defect that causes people's lives to go bad. Usually interpreted as some sort of brain disease, some sort of bad gene, or some sort of chemical imbalance. The bad gene theory, the chemical imbalance theory. That's pretty much it. And that explains it. Again, the important thing to know is that that is a theory and that's an opinion, and that there's no scientific evidence that justifies that as a fact. Bottom line. But it is the assumptions and the beliefs that justify labeling and stigmatizing all these people, institutionalizing them against their will, forcibly drugging them, electroshocking them, and calling toxic, brain-disabling drugs medicine. So that's one answer. Another answer, maybe even bigger than that one, would be that of the corporate answer, and particularly in this case, the pharmaceutical industry answer. And the pharmaceutical industry, of course, has its minions of psychiatry and insurance companies and et cetera. But the corporate answer is always that which feeds the primary values of that entity, which is called maximum profit and minimum liability. So mental illness is basically a profit point. Anybody with a mental illness is basically a profit point for a product. So the mental illnesses are the conditions branded as appropriate for the various drug products that are then sold for billions and billions and billions of dollars. So that's it. Mental illness is a profit. Mental illness is a made-up condition that justifies the marketing and sales and distribution of these products called psychopharmaceutical, psychotropic, psychoactive, psychiatric drugs. Those are the 2 best answers as far as what is happening and what so many people are led to believe. Now let's just get to what's really going on beyond that. First, Thomas Zatz's. Always comes back to Thomas Zatz's interpreted these things, his famous 1961 book, The Myth of Mental Illness, all the way up to his books that he's still putting out every year at age 85. The last one I read and did a video on, it's available on YouTube, is a review of his book course and his cure, The History of Psychiatry. The point is, though, simply that mental illness is a metaphor. It's not a brain disease. It's not a bad gene. It's not a real illness. It's a metaphor for real illness. In other words, it's supposed to be like mental illness. Mental illness is like physical illness. Physical illness is due to some confirmable physical or chemical abnormality. Therefore, it's assumed, and the theory is that mental illness is the same. But really, it's just a use of language. It's a piece of poetry, as Zaatz would say. He says, Everybody knows typhoid fever is a disease. You don't need a medical degree for that, right? Spring fever, on the other hand, right? It's a metaphor. Diabetes is a disease condition. ADHD is a metaphor that someone places due to a judgment on some kid's behavior. It's a metaphor. One of the purposes of the metaphor is to enforce normality. Again, my favorite YouTube video that I've done is called Psychology Test, Are You Normal? If you haven't checked that one out yet, just search in YouTube, Psychology Test, Are You Normal? But what's happening is that the bounds of normalcy keep getting squeezed. So anything considered abnormal is considered mentally ill. And so you lessen those boundaries since they're entirely subjective. You just have normal distribution of whatever, energy levels, moodiness, whatever. And so the more you squeeze the extremes in and call those abnormal, and then follow the assumptions of biological psychiatry that so-called abnormality is due to biologically or genetically based mental illness, then the profit points go up and the business goes up for the psychiatry and pharmaceutical industry. A large percentage of what's called mentally ill is just people's judgments about what's normal and discomfort with the full range of human behaviors and eccentricities and misbehaviors and oddnesses and etc. The majority of kids that get drugged, there's nothing wrong with them, really, except that there's a bunch of intolerant adults and problematic structures that they're involved in. Sometimes there's something going on, but don't assume that, because perhaps most of the time there's really not. Right? Fifth point. Better said, troubled and troubling behavior. If an individual is troubled, feeling a lot of anxiety, or feeling melancholy and blue, or feeling intense anger, or feeling confused and disorganized, troubled. We can all relate to that. That gets called mental illness. I call myself, I must be depressed. I need an antidepressant. Or I need Valium, I must be mentally ill. It's anxiety. It's a panic disorder, right? Troubled. I'm troubled, right? Or troubling. I don't have any problem. I'm kind of a nervous guy, or I'm kind of melancholy, but so what? But my wife is real concerned because she doesn't want me depressed, so she wants me to go see a psychiatrist, so I'm not depressed. Or I don't like school. I just like playing. But the teachers and the parents are concerned, and so they call me ADHD because it troubles them. It's troubling to others. That's a lot of what happens. Troubled and troubling behavior. All right? Another point, I have a whole video on trauma, or maybe 2 or 3 that you can look up again in YouTube on trauma. And it is true that trauma creates distress. When you're hurt, it causes distress, And the way out of that is not to subdue it and suppress it with drugs and stigmatize it with name-calling, It's to give some attention and figure out what's going on. What needs are not being met? Where have you been hurt? Has there been a lot of grief and loss? Has there been a lot of loss? Have there been deaths? Have there been losses? Have your parents abandoned you emotionally in some way as a child? Then you're going to feel troubled, and you're going to need some help to really fully get through that. Right? Janet Foner, who's the liberation reference person for mental health system oppression in the reevaluation counseling community, rc.org. They have liberation groups for different forms of oppression, one being psychiatric oppression. She says, what is mental illness really? It's the person having a long session or trying to have a session. And what she means is they're trying to get free of this distress that they're carrying. And a session in that context looks like extended crying, or ranting and raving, or shaking and trembling with sweat, or talking about what's troubling you. right? Or expressing some pattern that you've developed to cope with it, like avoiding people, and needing some help with that to get to the underlying distress so that it can be released and looked at, reevaluated. It takes a lot of attention. And it takes someone being around who's relaxed and confident enough and doesn't assume that the person's mentally ill and isn't afraid that they're going to die and can't stand being around somebody who's afraid. If you look at my so-called schizophrenia videos, or look at my Journal of Humanistic Psychology article, To See or Not to See Schizophrenia, so-called, which is available on my wildestcults.com website, right? You'll see that, it takes someone who is okay and understands that this can be gotten through, and the transformation involves facing these so-called demons, right? That's on an emotional and psychological level. It is true that a lot of so-called mental illnesses are also expressions, a lot of the symptoms that get classified that way are also symptoms of real physical illnesses, like a brain tumor, or like a thyroid problem, or like a blood sugar problem, or like a neurotoxicity due to heavy metals, or like a severe allergic reaction. That's a process of detective work and real medical investigation, looking for real physical and chemical abnormalities. Sometimes that can cause symptoms that get interpreted. I'm a psychologist, so I focus more on the emotional and psychological aspects. And trauma, the symptoms of any so-called mental illness also are symptoms of trauma. Doesn't mean that all mental illness, so-called mental illness, is trauma, but a lot of it is. And that can be healed if it's allowed to unfold in a way that's safe and supported. My book, The Necessity of Madness, on psychiatry and transformation. My books for parents working with kids, Wildest Cults Make the Best Horses, True Nature and Great Misunderstandings. Peter Bregan's book, Ty Colbert's books, Ty Colbert, C-O-L-B-E-R-T. Great books on working with people. And there's many, many others. Okay? So, resist the languaging and all the assumptions that go with the idea of mental illness. And just look at what's really going on. In with Thomas Johnson again. Psychiatric diagnoses are not descriptive. They're prescriptive. They don't describe anything. To call somebody a name like schizophrenic or bipolar or ADHD or whatever doesn't describe anything. It just stigmatizes them. It prescribes a course of action called treatment, which is actually interferes with authentic help and makes things worse in the long term. So I wish good news for everybody in this new year. And we all need as much help as we can get. So be generous with helping and supporting each other and allowing ourselves to be helped and supported. Just also remember the other joke that I've told before about the difference between a psychotic and a mystic. The mystic knows who not to talk to, right? So look at who you get help from. Make sure they're the kind of person you can trust and who supports the kind of beliefs and direction that you want to go. Thanks.
If you liked this video, we have hundreds of more alternative videos ranging from sexual health to psychology to mind control. So if you liked it, go ahead and click on me to enter the Psychetruth channel.